Hello Year 3, welcome back to chapter 20. A good deal goes bad, and if you remember the very end of last chapter, Lady Crepuscular had turned up in the Vault of Secrets. So here we go. "You've kept up quite a pace," said the Lady Crepuscular, folding her hands over the head of her cane. "I might choose to be impressed if the experience hadn't been so utterly frustrating." Susie looked around for a way out, but she was surrounded. Crepuscular and her shadow blocked the main doors, while the statues stood in a tight semicircle around her. So she was a little surprised to discover that her earlier panic was receding. She had spent so long worrying about Crepuscular catching her that it was almost a relief to have had it actually happen. It gave her mind a little room to think. "How did you know we'd be here?" Susie asked. Then she noticed the tiny figure slinking into the room behind Crepuscular, as though trying not to be noticed. "Fletch," she said. The engineer flinched. "None of this was my idea," he muttered. "I'm just here for what's mine." "As we all are," said Crepuscular, extending a hand towards Susie. "Don't do it," Frederick cried. "Don't let her take me." Susie clutched the snow globe to her chest. "You're not having him?" Crepuscular sighed. "I'm a reasonable woman. Return Frederick to me, and I might be persuaded to let you walk away." "Why should I trust you?" "That's a little rich coming from a thief, my dear." She flexed the fingers of her outstretched hand. "Come on, my patience isn't infinite." "Run," Susie said Frederick, "or fight her, but don't just stand there. Do something." Crepuscular's face twisted into a grim smile. "You know, Frederick, it occurs to me to wonder precisely what you told this young lady to persuade her to run off with you like this. I bet it wasn't the truth." "I've told her everything," Frederick protested. Crepuscular turned a questioning look on Susie, who wanted to squirm. She knew Frederick hadn't given her the full story, but she wasn't about to give Crepuscular the satisfaction of knowing that. "It doesn't matter what he told me," she said, hardening her resolve. "I wouldn't leave him with someone like you." "Then you're even more foolish than I feared," said Crepuscular. "But since you're so clearly open to persuasion, and you've nowhere left to run to, perhaps you would accept an exchange. Something of yours for something of mine." "Don't listen to her," said Frederick. "I'm not making any deals," said Susie. "Wait until you hear my offer." Crepuscular reached into her jacket and drew out an empty glass jar, sealed with a lid. Susie gave it a look of suspicion. "What's that?" "The 30 minutes of your life that I took from you," she said, holding the jar up to the light. "Yours in return for Frederick. Oh, and this pitiful creature's wand, which I understand is also in your possession." She indicated Fletch, who looked as though he was waiting for the ground to open up and swallow him. "I think that's more than fair, don't you?" "You must think I'm stupid," said Susie. "It's just an empty jar." Crepuscular scowled. "And what exactly did you expect time to look like? Would you prefer me to fill it with tinsel?" Susie didn't know what to say in response to this, so she said nothing. She was still trying to think of a way out. "This is a measure of the most precious resource in existence," Crepuscular continued. "Every living soul wants more of it, and it's yours if you just give Frederick back to me." "Susie," Frederick sounded scared. She was certain he couldn't be trembling inside that globe, but it felt like it. Or was it her own hand shaking? "Susie, please don't." She planted her feet more firmly on the floor and looked Crepuscular in the eye. "No deal," she said. "It's only 30 minutes. It's not worth one person's life." Crepuscular's expression darkened. "Are you sure about that? I trimmed the end of your mortal span. Your life ends 30 minutes sooner than it should. Imagine what you could do with that time back." "Not much." Susie was trying to sound like she didn't care, but the awful truth was that Crepuscular's words were sowing doubt in her mind. What could she do with that time? "They're the most important minutes of your life," said Crepuscular, her voice low and urgent now. "Your chance to make your last decisions, to bid a final farewell to family and friends, to tell a secret love of your true feelings, to finally set right what once went wrong." Cold sweat glued Susie's pyjamas to her skin. "The end of my life," she said. "Have you seen it?" Crepuscular's smile was like a shark's. "Would you like to know when it's due?" The question worked its way under Susie's skin like needles of ice, and for a few seconds she couldn't tell if this new feeling was dread or excitement. Nobody was supposed to know the moment of their own death. That would be a terrible thing to live with. Wouldn't it? Because what if she could know? Her mind came alive with the possibility, even as her skin erupted in goosebumps. Would her life be long or short? Her death noble or tragic? Would she die alone? If she knew these things, she could live her life with a plan and fix all the problems before they even happened. She could fix everything. But then the feeling dwindled as she looked up into Crepuscular's leering grin. She had already tried to fix things, and this was where it had brought her. Her plan had failed, and all she had left was the choice that Crepuscular had given her. "No," she said, with absolute certainty, "and I don't care what you tell me. I'm not giving you Frederick." Crepuscular stared hard at her for a moment, then sighed. "In which case we shall have to resort to unpleasantness." Susie backed away as Crepuscular stalked towards her. "Stop!" Susie froze in surprise, and even Crepuscular paused, a look of impatient confusion on her face. Susie turned towards the source of the voice. "Oh no," she breathed. Wilmot stood in the hidden doorway, his baggy uniform pooling around his ankles, and his cap at a drunken angle on his head. "Wilmot, don't," she started, but he silenced her with a look of fire. She had never seen him like this before. He was furious. "Lady Crepuscular," he said, striding down the length of the room towards them. The statues parted to let him pass. "I must ask you to unhand my employee." "And who might you be?" said Crepuscular. "I am Postmaster Wilmot Grunt of the Impossible Postal Service," he said, drawing to a halt beside Susie. "This postal operative is my responsibility, and as such, I believe, I owe you an apology." Crepuscular raised an eyebrow. "I don't care for apologies, boy. I simply require restoration." "I understand," said Wilmot, ignoring the slight against his age. "Nevertheless, let me apologise fully and sincerely on behalf of the Impossible Postal Service. Our operative stole from you, and we take such breaches of our ethical guidelines very seriously indeed." Susie put herself between Wilmot and Crepuscular. "What are you doing?" she whispered. He calmly brushed her aside, but as he did so, he muttered, "Trust me," out of the corner of his mouth. He straightened his cap and addressed Crepuscular again. "Consequently, the Impossible Postal Service will be happy to return your item and to compensate you for the inconvenience caused. The disciplinary proceedings for the postal operative Susie Smith, however, must remain an internal matter." Before Crepuscular could reply, the sound of rapid footsteps made everyone turn again, and Gertrude emerged from the hidden exit at a run. She skidded to a stop in the middle of the hall, the statues blocking her path. "Wilmot," she cried, trying to fight her way past them. "Wilmot, darling, get out of there!" Susie chewed her lip, but Wilmot turned back. "Don't worry, Mum," he said. "I'm just doing my job." Crepuscular sniffed and turned her attention back to him. "You want me to leave your little pet alone, after everything she's done?" "She is not my pet," said Wilmot, "but yes, and you, of course, have the right to file a formal complaint, if you so wish. I have the necessary form here." He reached inside his jacket and pulled out a small rectangular piece of paper, which he held out to Crepuscular. For a moment the hall was silent. Then Crepuscular began to laugh, softly at first, but growing louder and louder until her shoulders shook. Susie took an involuntary step back, but Wilmot stood his ground, the complaint form not so much as wavering. Then Crepuscular pointed at him, and her shadow rushed forward. No! Susie lunged for him, but it was already too late. The shadow swallowed him whole. Wilmot's dwindling cry reached her as though from a great distance, and when the shadow receded, nothing remained but his cap, lying crumpled and forlorn on the flagstones. Susie stood, immobilised by shock. She could hear Gertrude screaming. "I've had enough of these distractions," said Crepuscular, bearing down on Susie. "If you won't hand Frederick over, I'll take him myself." Panic struck, and Susie's mind went blank. All she could think about was Wilmot vanishing into the darkness. It was all her fault. "Susie, please!" Frederick's voice cut through the fog in her brain, and she saw that Crepuscular was almost on her. She couldn't bargain, she couldn't run. All she could do was fight, and so in a final act of desperation, she reached into her pocket, pulled out the first thing her hand fell on, and threw it hard at Crepuscular. It was Fletcher's wand. Crepuscular saw it coming and brought a hand up to shield himself. It was the hand holding the jam jar. The rod struck the jar, which exploded in a nimbus of glass. Susie shut her eyes, and that's when everything stopped. And that is also the end of the chapter, and I'm going to leave it there. So join me tomorrow to hear the next instalment. Bye for now.